All right, colleagues, it is 6 o'clock. Good evening. Sistombi, Ben, are we good to go? I see that Honorable Van Minen is here and Honorable Somyu is here.
Yeah, that's 5 so far.
Of course, the rest of us, the members, but those two specifically, who will be leading the hearing this evening. So, colleagues, may I take this opportunity to welcome you. Sis Ntombi, Ben, can you ascertain if we are good to go on your side and so far as members are concerned?
Yes, you can proceed, Chair.
Ben, Sis Ntombi.
Chair. Chair, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can go.
Colleagues, good evening and welcome to this hearing into the essentials of SITA, the State Information Technology Agency, into the 2019-20 financial year. I would like to check from the Ministry and Department side who is present, and then we'll be good to go. All right, the Minister is present. Minister Ndabeni Abrahams, good evening, Minister, to you and your team. I would like to start off by saying that this is a postponed hearing, given the unfortunate sequence of events last week, which compelled the committee to postpone this meeting, which was quite regrettable, to say the very least. But nonetheless, here we are today, and we will start the hearing. The most integral part, of course, of why the Minister, we wanted her here is because there is no board and there is a representative of some sort. So before we could do anything about these financials, we had to start there for this hearing. So I think the fact that everybody is here now gives us a full complement for the purposes of the hearing. Of course, there's a regression in the financials, some 7 findings, areas of findings by the AG, from 4 in the previous year and 2 in the 17-18 financial year. So it's quite clear that there is a regression and we move from unqualified to a qualified audit, and that is, of course, of serious concern to us. So what we'll do is I'm going to give the Minister an opportunity to make remarks, and then Babu Somyo, you will be first off the bat. Then when you are done, Honorable Van Minen will come in after that. And then at the conclusion of the hearing, the Minister will have an opportunity again. But in the course of the hearing, should the Minister feel that there are issues that need to be responded to ensure that the direction of the responses is consistent with the issues, she will have an opportunity as and when is necessary to respond. So, colleagues, let's welcome the Ministry and the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and the and SITA, of course, who are appearing before us this evening. So, colleagues, I think we find Babu Somyo, as soon as the Minister is done, you will be first off the bat. Minister Ndabeni Abrahams, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson, and good evening to all the honorable members, and of course the team from our department and the lead agency for purposes of today. Chairperson, firstly, let me take this opportunity to apologize for what you referred to as the unfortunate events of last week, wherein we were held up in the budget vote, and as usual, the department had lined up some interviews as we normally do. So we really apologize for that. I do get to hear that an apology was sent late, and that was not out of disrespect. We really would like to apologize to the Portfolio Committee. Chairperson, in your opening remarks, you are making reference to the first thing that you are talking about, that we are here today for a hearing. And one of the things is the fact that SITA does not have a board. In my delegation, I have the DDGs responsible for SOE oversight. I have SITA chairperson. I have the SITA executive caretaker and any other person that they may have invited. Firstly, let me appraise the honorable members and all the participants in the Portfolio Committee that for a number of years, as you are all aware, if you were paying attention to the performance of SITA, SITA was faced with serious service delivery challenges, of course, which stemmed from its failure to provide the mandatory ICT goods and services as obligated in law in relation to the public service that they should serve. Of course, the failure to execute its mandate efficiently and effectively resulted in provincial administrations. I would just mention a few. If you're looking into the Gauteng and Limpopo and other departments, if you go to the Department of Police, if you go to Home Affairs, that they were all flocking to the minister's office, requesting that they be exempted in accordance with Regulation 17 of the SITA regulations so that they can procure directly. I want to take members back to why SITA was established, but on the matters that we are dealing with. SITA was established to, among other things, to promote the efficiency of departments and not to constrain departments from delivering on their respective mandates. SITA's failure had a negative impact on the attainment of goals and targets this department set for itself. And as I mentioned, the Regulation 17 there, it means that departments are not able to go on time and deliver as they have planned in their APPs because of SITA's failures. Of course, we then had to consider the impact and therefore grant the exemptions, which would have really defeated the goals of achieving the economies of scale. And on the other hand, not giving them the exemption or granting them the exemption would have then meant that the departments are not going to be able to deliver or achieve their goals because of SITA's failure. It became evident to us that these challenges that SITA is faced with, they stemmed from systematic failures. And of course, as the shareholder representative, I deemed it prudent to appoint an executive caretaker that was tasked to do an in-depth assessment of the challenges to assist the executive authority to appoint as new members persons who have suitable skills and competencies to turn SITA around. Of course, we had performance intervention meeting first with all the executive members and board members that were there by the time on the 8th of November 2019. And their term came to an end January 2020. We therefore gave effect upon approval by Cabinet, as we spoke to this, that stemming from 2017 decision that Cabinet was frustrated that there's something that must be done by SITA. And then, as I said, when we then expressed this when we came into office and nothing had been done earlier, we then said, Cabinet, please give us an opportunity. We need to repurpose SITA to be responsive to the challenges of today. And this, honorable members, meant that we have to do away with the legacy projects and systems that SITA has. If you read the SITA Act, it does stipulate of what is supposed to be done by SITA. If you're looking at the challenges that are faced today, these are challenges that do not go with the modernized technologies, and SITA is expected to deliver on those. So with that, we are driving a digital economy, And therefore, digital transformation of the public service first is critical, and we need an entity that must be responsive to that. And of course, we do this checking other countries and also being aware that we're not only looking at procurement, because we had reduced SITA to being a procurement agency. And all we need as a country is a digital services agency that should be able to give an opportunity to the people of South Africa, our local innovators, because as we speak right now, everything that happens, SITA is a reseller of products, which is why if you are going to talk to sector transformation, you need to make sure that you have everyone on board in order to address those, and it is impossible to do it. This is why amongst the interventions that they are focusing on is localization, as I speak to you right now. We then on the 19th of March, 2020, we then appointed an interim board as guided by the law. An interim board which was led by Mr. Omega Shalembe, who is the DDG Entity Oversight, Mr. Geise, who is now Executive Caretaker, and the acting CFO, who was Mr. Andre Pretorius, in order to comply with that was stipulated within the law. The first thing that we needed to do, of course, is to check the legalities of the decision that we take, as much as we are looking at the programs and the output that we want to see. Will this be achievable within the law? And indeed, we sought a legal opinion wherein on the 27th of December, we instructed the Office of the State Attorney to appoint a senior counsel to furnish the executive authority and the department with advice on the requirements and processes that needed to be followed if we are to undertake this process.
Recording in progress.
If you are to undertake this process of saying this time
Recording
we're not going to appoint a full-time board, because we are only looking at a 2-year
Recording in
process
progress.
wherein we are repurposing it, so that by the time you go and appoint the board, we know very well that this is what the board must look at. And indeed, Advocate Baloyi was appointed, and she furnished us with an opinion, if you allow me. She made the following things. The following recommendations. SITA is established by Section 2, Subsection 1 of the State Information and Technology Agency Act 38 of 1998. And in terms of Section 2, Subsection 1 thereof, it is incorporated as a private company in terms of the Companies Act of 1998. Section 4, Subsection 1 of the Act provides that the provisions of the Companies Act will apply to the agency, except where otherwise stated in this Act. The second one is on Section 8, which prescribes that SITA will be governed and controlled by a board of directors appointed by the minister after consultation with Cabinet, responsible for approving the business and operational affairs of SITA and to represent SITA, the majority of whom must be non-executives. SITA is a listed national public entity in terms of the PFMA 1 of 1999, and according to Section 49, Subsection 1 thereof, the board is the accounting authority for purposes of the PFMA. The functions and responsibilities of the directors are described in the Act. If you look at Sections 8 and 9, the PFMA on Sections 49 to 51, the Companies Act, Section 66. Section 66, Subsection 1 of the Companies Act provides that the business and affairs of a company must be managed by or under the direction of its board, which has the authority to exercise all the powers and perform any of the functions of the company, except to the extent that this Act or the company's memorandum of incorporation provides otherwise. That's the emphasis. Neither the Act, the Companies Act, nor the MOI provide for the shareholder to appoint an administrator to administer the affairs of SITA in the place of the board and the managing director. Nevertheless, nothing precludes the amendment of the MOI to provide for and permit the shareholder to place SITA under administration and under the control of the administrator. Accordingly, the minister, may act in terms of Section 60, subsection 1 of the Companies Act, read with Article 4 of the MOI, to pass a special resolution amending the MOI accordingly. Similarly, all honorable members, neither the Act, the Companies Act, nor the MOI preclude a shareholder special resolution to place SITA under administration and to appoint an administrator with such powers as the minister may determine. However, the decision must be based on valid reasons and in a manner that is procedurally fair to the incumbent directors. The decision must accordingly be rational. The appointment of an administrator is an alternative arrangement to appointing a board should the minister so elect. The reasons for placing SITA under administration must be valid, failing which the decision to do so is likely to be found irrational. Now, the advocate, honorable members, refers us to a case law of Hlubi and others versus USASA and the Minister of Communications case J2951/2011 at the Labour Court of South Africa in Johannesburg. In this matter, the applicants, being Andrew Hlubi, Mulifi Molo, and Achimbata, sought an order from court declaring that the appointment of the third, which then was Mr. Temba Puri, and the fourth respondent, then Mr. Sam Vilagazi, by the second respondent, which was the Minister of Communications, as caretakers of the first respondent, USASA in this context, was unlawful and null and void for failure to comply with the provisions of the Electronic Communications Act. The executive caretakers instituted disciplinary proceedings against the applicants, and applicants contended, firstly, that their suspicion was not justified, and secondly, that they were not afforded an opportunity to be heard prior to their suspension. In respect of the decision by the executive caretakers to subject them to a disciplinary inquiry, the applicants further contended that this action was ultra-virus, in that the decision was taken and communicated by the third respondent, whose appointment as executive caretaker by the minister was unlawful and invalid. Applicants based their argument for stating that the action was ultra-virus on the fact that the minister is a creature of statute, and therefore the lawfulness of the exercise of power by the minister must be assessed against the provisions of the Electronic Communications Act. The applicant submitted that the appointment of the third and fourth respondents by the minister was unlawful, in that the only power conferred upon the minister in terms of Section 80 of the Electronic Communications Act is to appoint the board of the first respondent. According to the applicants,
my apologies. Yes. I'm asked by Parliament Communications that we turn on our cameras this for the purposes of this hearing. So all of us will be on the platform speaking. Please do turn on your camera. The only standing apology in this regard is that of Mam Tolashe in the Council. Minister, please do. And I will ask Minister that if you can round up so that we can then get into the hearing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson. I was trying to take the members through the process that we followed, including the legal opinions that we sought before we undertake the process. Of course, as I said earlier, upon getting this legal opinion, we then called a shareholders meeting wherein a resolution was taken to amend the MOI that gave birth to the interim board that we have, and of course, the appointment of the executive caretaker, as I have said. And the board, Chairperson, the interim board will serve for 2 years as approved by Cabinet, because we had to give an opportunity for proper processes, including the legislative amendments that need to be made. We did, of course, honorable members, an assessment, a performance assessment in January 2021. And indeed, we're pleased to say from the performance of 42% of SITA, as we're speaking with you on the third quarter, we were standing at 60-something, and that's something that we applaud. Indeed, the decision that we took has yielded results. And of course, Chairperson, that we have referred to in relation to the performance in terms of the finances, I will then, with your permission, Chairperson, allow the Chairperson of SITA to get into the details as you had to start with your appearance. I felt like it's important that I deal with the policy matters, because I always say on administrative processes, we do appoint boards as accounting authorities, and they are the people that monitor the day-to-day processes. And as the executive authorities, we come when necessary. Where there are critical questions that are asked in relation to the role that we play, that we're expected to play as the executive authority, we will, Chairperson, as you had indicated earlier, we will come in and respond. But everything administratively, we do have the board and the management that must talk to them. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to Babu Somyo. He's going to be leading the hearing, and then Honorable Van Minen, you will come in afterwards. And then, so one question, one response, we'll structure it in that fashion. Babu Somyo, we are in your hands, Bab. Over to you. Babu Somyo, please unmute yourself. Honorable Somyo, please unmute yourself. Honorable Somyo, please unmute. Ben Stomby, please try calling him. I'm not sure if he's indicating a problem.
Hello, Chair.
Right, there you go. Okay, Babu Somyo, you can start. You had been muted, right?
Okay. Well, Chair, let me welcome the ministers and his her team, and as well welcome her introductory remarks on the hearing. In agreeing with the points that she has raised on the strategic nature of SITA, which is the real instance of us having invited SITA to be part of this hearing today, of our own concern in terms of their own performance, which has shown regression, as you indicated earlier on. One of the critical matters is what the minister has highlighted, which relates to an instance which is viewed as a lack of stability in the institution, which is very critical when you deal with a institution strategic in the nature of SITA, which is defined as a technology agency, which offers a full spectrum of ICT services to the South African government and the public bodies, and designed to improve service delivery to the public generally. And more so at the time when we seek to pursue drastically the fourth industrial revolution, which the minister sought to champion quite excellently, so that he steers the country towards the realization of that kind of a dream. This institution has, through the Auditor General's findings, indicated some kind of a glaring instance of that unrequired instability at the top. For example, if you look into the nature of appointments which have not as yet been fulfilled, looking into the authority itself, because of what the minister has outlined on the caretakership, mainly where you would have a board which is constituted by the SITA's acting CEO, SITA's CFO, and the interim chairperson who is the director, in fact, the Deputy Director General in the department. That itself would require us to poke into that question. If the minister is satisfied that the institution is doing so well, why is there a delay in terms of the appointment of the fully fledged board, which could benefit the institution in terms of improving the sense of required governance, looking into the committees that are required in terms of the functionality, accountability of the institution, in terms of a number of committees which ought to steer this kind of institution to high success levels. Do you have any timelines, Minister, towards realization of that fully fledged board, which is going to be independent in terms of its own functionality, taking from what you have been indicating in terms of your opening statement? Minister?
Thank you so much, Honorable Somyo, and I would like to make reference to my opening remarks as I try to respond to some of the questions. I did say that, yes, correctly so, we appointed an interim board as guided by the legal, that we had the legal opinion. But of course, Chairperson, you're asking a critical thing, that am I satisfied with the performance of the agency right now that they do not have a fully fledged board? Earlier on, I did say that the request that were made and the permission that we got was that we can repurpose SITA for a period of 24 months, which means Cabinet approved that SITA will have an executive caretaker and an interim board for 24 months, that is ending in January 2022. I mentioned, Chairperson, Honorable Member, earlier on, to say in January 2021, as that was the first year or 12 months in office of the executive caretaker with the interim board, we then assessed the performance, which is why we renewed the contract of the executive caretaker, looking at the performance and the progress on the performance that was there at SITA. And that led to us also reviewing in terms of the kind of people that are there as directors. As I said, we needed to appoint a sizable number of directors. And in that context, it was 3, which is why now, as we are speaking, we have 4 board members outside the executives of SITA, because we are introducing something that we are guided by legal, but we said after 12 months, subject to review to see if this works or it doesn't. And in this context, we had to then increase and make sure that we bring external people to SITA for oversight. Of course, as I said, Cabinet has approved 24 months. It therefore means that we are not going to be appointing a fully fledged board for that period of 24 months until, as you're asking for the timelines, that we will only appoint for February 2022, and that's the end of this term. Chairperson, the delay, as I said, and asking about the functionality, Honorable Somyo, I said in my remarks earlier that SITA has not been performing well. So as much as we are aware of the governance issues that we needed to look at, but with a fully fledged board, we did not get this that we have gotten now in terms of the results when we talk about the performance, including as we're looking at the clients that we service as SITA, and this is something that has really improved, which means, as we were also presenting our progress report, which means we are a bit comfortable to say the decision that was taken was in the interest of not only SITA, but SITA's clients in this context, the government that you are talking about. SITA is at the forefront of making sure that we digital transform government, but all of that requires amendments to the law. Hence, I spoke of the legacy that we have inherited, because in the old law, which led to us saying we are repurposing so that we have a fit for purpose SITA, it does not give space for SITA to participate in an innovative or modern technologies. And these are the things that we are beginning to address, Honorable Somyo. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. In the same vein, the current reliance on the board, which is interim, on the CFO who is acting and has been acting for probably 3 to 4 years. Is there any realized factor for the institution to be kept in that form?
Thank you once more, Honorable Somyo. It is not true that the CFO has been acting for 3 to 4 years. We filled in the vacancies last year because the minute we took a decision to say we're going for the executive caretaker, we understood the importance of stabilizing the organization at the executive level. Hence, we appointed the SITA CFO by the name of Mulwehlahle Gawe, who is the CFO of SITA. And as we talk about the interim board, of the interim board, including its composition, as I'm speaking to you now, Honorable Member, we have Mr. Andrew Murray, we have Mr. Temba Puri, we have Mr. Mkoli Sitsiga, we have Ms. Jeanette Murawe, who are the outside or the non-executive board members at SITA or directors. Then on top, you have the executive caretaker and the CFO. Thank you, Honorable Member.
Or you have now the permanent CFO, and in terms of the signing of the financials were signed by the acting CEO and the chairperson. The role of the CEO in terms of the financials is not necessarily certified. What would have been that role in the current audit of the financials?
Thank you, Chairperson. I would request SITA to respond on that one, as I did indicate that on some of the pure administrative issues, they will take responsibility. With your permission, Honorable Chair.
Okay. SITA?
Thank you very much, Minister and Chair and Honorable Somyo. We can confirm Mr. Hawe was appointed after the 31st of March. So hence then the signing of the financials included then the acting CFO who was acting during the period of the financials.
Oh, so it's a fact that the CFO has been acting at the time.
We can confirm by the period, which is the, oh, sorry, Minister.
No, that's okay. You can go ahead because the question was not posed as in the signing of the statements, and we can confirm, as you correctly say, executive caretaker, through your Honorable Somyo, that by the time those financials were signed, yes, then we had not undertaken this process of filling in the vacancies.
In all the questions, Honorable Minister will be referring to the current audit on the audit report for the year 2019-20, and the actual reference would be the reference to the outcomes of that audit as confirmed by the Auditor General. So it says that answering the question which I was asking on the temporal nature of the CFO, the post has since filled for the current financial year, not necessarily the current audit period. Thank you very much for that clarity. Getting into the area that relates to what the AG has indicated as a number of anomalies in as far as your financials are concerned, has highlighted property, plant and equipment, intangible assets, irregular expenditure, predetermined objectives, expenditure management, consequence management, procurement and contract management, and material misstatements in annual financial statements. We can, for my purpose, because my colleague is going to take other areas that relate to property, intangible, and areas that relate to plant and equipment. My focus now is going to be on the area that relates to the gross misstatements. The gross misstatements are as well in reference of your presentation on a number of instances, either the failure to follow GRAP 31 and GRAP 3 in terms of the determined public entity assets, which were somewhat listed outside that format, which has shown insufficient and appropriate audit evidence to support the assumptions made by the public entity. Why do you think that your own financials had to carry an information which relate to misstatements in terms of these defines? I hope the SITA would respond to this question.
Thank you very much, Honorable Somio. I will then ask the CFO, the acting, to respond then to that question, simply in terms of the GRAP implications and what is it we have done since then. I hand over to you, CFO.
Thank you, honourable members. Just in terms of the qualification, there was, in essence, is the qualifications relate to the assessment of useful lives, where it's normally regarded as a management judgment. So it's a judgment by management, and in terms of that, what happens during the audit, normally management provide a write-up of the judgments that were applied during the process of the assessment of useful lives. During the year, the write-ups were provided, and where the AG previous years have accepted a certain format and a certain write-up, during the year under review, the AG was very, very strict, and they felt that management did not apply its mind properly in terms of the assessment of useful lives. So in terms of that, what we have done during the year, we've gone through an extensive process since the finalization of the previous audit, where we then done a very intense followed a very intense program and project in terms of the useful life assessments. And these useful life assessments, the project has been completed. Useful lives, all the useful lives of the assets have been revised, and we believe that we are now compliant with GRAP with regards to useful lives. That's the first one. The useful life assessment then obviously, although it's talk about fixed assets and the intangible assets, the same principle would apply. The second thing that the AG had an issue with is where management, in terms of the GRAP requirements, where we had to assess the different assets for impairment. And again, the write-ups that we provided and the information that we provide is in support of the management judgment that was exercised in support of the impairment assessments were also rejected by the AG. In response to that, management, it's also during the last, since the finalization of the previous audit until now, we've also finalized all the impairments assessments for both the fixed assets and the intangible assets. And as a result, we also believe we comply with that. So that's in terms of the qualifications relating to the fixed assets and the qualifications for the intangible assets. In terms of the process of irregular expenditure, our supply chain management has appointed a service provider to assist them, because what the AG requires, they picked up a few cases, and what they then said is, but if they on a sample selection pick up cases of irregular expenditure, then they wanted management to go back and review the files that was applicable. The review of the files, the nature of the findings by the AG was specific within the procurement process, where specific interpretation issues where they did not agree, and where we had to accept the irregular expenditure, the findings from the AG. But the nature of it was actually within the procurement process itself. So it's not something that you would pick up and controls that you can put outside of the procurement process. Management is subsequently, and our procurement division has appointed a service provider which has reviewed the files for the last 2 years. And those service providers, at the moment, the process finished, and management is busy validating the possible cases that has been identified by a service provider. The qualification is about the completeness of the irregular expenditure, and where the SCM said, apologies, Chairperson, where the Auditor General said that because they picked up items in the sample, they did not know whether there was other items also included in the population that they were not aware of, and that was the need, why there was a need for management to go back and review the last 2 years of procurement files. And that has been completed, so the validation process of the items identified by a service provider is currently in process. Thank you, Honourable Member.
I think thank you, CFO.
Welcome, CFO. Welcome, CFO. This is baptism by fire.
I thought I would answer in detail, Honourable Somio, so that the impairment issues that CFO, I thought you will speak technically, then I'll speak simpler English. So the useful life and impairments of assets, it's assets not only for the 1920 financial year, so we also had to go back for the 3 financial years before.
Don't worry, CEO. My colleague is going to take that question forward on the specificity of those areas. Mine was to just discover the reasoning and your acknowledgement of the misstatement in as far as your listing of such is concerned. But together with what the CFO has ventured into, the question that relates to the understated irregular expenditure, which the Auditor General went further into that declared reality, that the public entity did not have adequate systems in place to identify and report all irregular expenditure incurred. How do you seek to correct this kind of an arrangement? I hear that you have started to look into files, and that tells us that indeed this point has been confirmed, because now you have sought out an assistance from a service provider to physically assist you mining files, mining information for you to determine what has not necessarily been listed fully as part of irregular expenditure, which is a very gross finding.
Thank you very much, Honourable Somio. I think what the work then that we have done, beyond what CFO has done, to say we have appointed a company to assist us in reviewing all the documentation. Because part of the process then is how do you then prevent irregular expenditure going forward? So we've also implemented controls where one of the glaring things that SITA did not have is a contract management discipline, including a manager responsible overall for contract management. As you will see in the slides that are there, that within the first 3 months, we then had to ensure that there is a senior manager in HOD who's responsible for total contract management. We've also implemented contract management systems within the organization to ensure that we know all the contracts that are there. But lastly, as we pay for invoices, we don't pay without understanding where is the contract for this invoice that I'm paying for. Because then the second question beyond that, Honorable Somia, will be, am I paying for something that is regular? Then when it is irregular, you then say, why am I now paying for something irregular? What is the consequence management that needs to be implemented? I see you are laughing, because these are basics that should have been implemented years ago. So within the period that we have come in is now to put the basics in place, which we can confirm now they are in place. As you would also see, even in the condonement of irregular expenditure, these were continuing irregular expenditure, not necessarily new things. So we have done that for now. I can confirm that.
So you're content that your control environment has been improved since the Auditor General has made these findings. Are you content that your control environment has been far improved since the Auditor General has made these findings? Can I hear that?
We will confirm that, Honorable Somio. The work that we are doing is to address all historic contracts that have been there, so that as we go along, we know that there is nothing historic that is continuing as irregular. So I'm content there is now serious control environment, including real consequence management, not warning letters, not the nice thing, but real consequence management, things that are implemented. I can confirm that.
Thank you very much. In terms of the Auditor General, on the same item, the finding is that about 2.2 billion rand is a totality of irregular expenditure, an amount which is awaiting your processes of condonation. What is it that is holding you on such a functional administrative process? SITA?
Thank you very much, Honorable Somio. So part of the process was the work we were doing to review all of those irregular contracts. As you will also see in the slides that we have already provided, already half of that irregular expenditure has already been condoned by National Treasury, which also confirms that we have indeed implemented all the necessary consequence management around that irregular expenditure. 1 billion 58 has already been condoned. There are already cases of 553 million rands that have already also been submitted additionally, additional condonement to National Treasury, as we've finished all the work around those irregular expenditure. And what we are concluding is also the additional samples for 680 million that National Treasures, that AG also raised as possible irregular expenditure. We will also finalize that matter by the end of this month, which is Monday, where we have a full board meeting where we'll also give them feedback on the last remaining portion. So 3/3 of that irregular expenditure that was identified by AG has either been condoned, some we have proved that they are not irregular, and half of that has also been submitted additionally to National Treasury for condonment.
Thank you very much. The Auditor General moves further to accept that you have given the breakdown of irregular expenditure, but you did not include the names of service providers involved. And the point highlighted is at page 128 of your annual report. Is that the anomaly or the normal way of your accounting practice? And if that is the case, how going forward do we seek to correct the measures of accountability by yourselves in a correct mode by SITA?
Thank you, Honorable Somio. I can confirm now that we have changed the reporting to ensure that we include the full names as it is there on the annexure that we have provided. For all of these, we now list the names of each and every company, and also we also list the consequence management done, and we include the names of the people where we have done the consequence management for that. So for that anomaly, we are now clearing. The information was there already, but I guess the key issue was why did we not include it as we submitted this? So we have now ensured that we submit it. It is information that has already been there, but it was not published. But we are now publishing it to make sure that we are as transparent as possible.
Thank you very much. There is a litany. There's a litany of those contracts which have been highlighted on the limping side on your own accountability instrument, starting from a contract IE 00104, which has been awarded of a value of 42.3 million rand, IE 00149, IE 00154, IE 00156, IE 00159 for 57.5 million rand, which has been incurred due to the continued procurement of access links and bandwidth for various sites after the expiry of the contract on March 2018. Why is it the case that when the contract expires, you don't set up in motion proper mechanisms for such renewals or for such a tender to go public for a new contract to be entered into?
Thank you, Honorable Somio. I think the key issue, especially what you will find, is that for broadband or data lines, they account for almost 45% of the total irregular expenditure, which is about, simply put, if you already have a company providing data or internet services in a department, then as and when SITA then or that department wishes to add additional lines. So if I'm Department of Home Affairs, I have 100 employees. So now I need additional 20 more employees. I need more connectivity, or I am moving to the premise next door as part of my premise. So SITA then in that process was then not going. So what was the SCM processes were requiring that SITA must go through a tender process all the time to add more data lines within that specific department, which is the key thing that made it irregular. The second problem, Honorable Somio, I started with was that there is then poor or no real contract management, because as you keep on asking the same telecoms, connect more people in the same department, SITA did not have the visibility of exactly how much are we spending in this master services agreement with the broadband partners specifically. So that's what led to this huge irregular expenditure with the person who was listing there, which we have now changed in two ways. So one, the visibility on the contracts, so that you don't keep on spending on a contract and not knowing the value of it. That's the bottom line. But two, on things like broadband contracts, ensure that you appoint broadband partners either per region, either per province or per district, because the reality is you're on your voice contract, you don't go on an additional tender to add more telephone lines in that building. But for the data contract, it's the opposite. So we've also fixed that in terms of the type of framework agreements that we do, because beyond irregular contract, that process was also putting delays of up to 6 months for departments to add more lines, including hospitals for that matter, where we could not connect them. But it was a simple failure of proper contract management, which we have now confirmed. There is no approval of any contract or payment on any contract without ensuring that that contract is on the system. we can really understand the expenditure on that contract, and you have also simplified your broadband contract and how it's managed going forward.
Why? Well, I hear you on the contract management space, which overall takes some form of responsibility on those matters. A very simple thing that you would know that your contract is ending on the 28th of May, and you sit, you observe. Is it not literally at times something which require hardcore consequence management to those responsible for their failure to go into such existing contract related documents, the data present, and not even mining that data is something which is available. They work with such, and they could know that this contract is come to an end. Therefore, let me set into process a legitimate process which is going to assist with the extension of this contract if need be, or with going out in terms of the open tender in as far as this contract is concerned. And therefore it bodes so much on the capacity instance or on direct unreliable managerial practice in as far as the line which is supposed to procure these services is concerned. What's your take, SITA?
To confirm, Honorable Somio, on the telecoms business or the network services business where these contracts were being run, were run by techies with lack of proper project management, contract management, discipline, and expertise. And SITA has been assisting government departments and connecting them, failing to manage the basics of contract management, which is what we have now since implemented. But the key question then, I guess you also have, is that because these are basic things that should have been implemented that I've unfortunately inherited in my 2 months in that financial year, that they were not properly implemented. And we can confirm that we have now also made basic project managers, finance people available to our telecoms business simply to do this work, so that they stop being technical people, but we also manage the contracts that they are responsible for as delivering services. And the second question you're asking for is, now that you have seen this problem, is the consequence management that you are implementing really appropriate for this type of a glaring poor service or poor management of contracts? I can really confirm to you that the SITA that we inherited that used to be giving too much warning letters or final written warning letters, we have now changed from that to ensure that we really get beyond just giving people warning letters. For this instance, you will see that it is one individual who was demoted from an HOD into a senior manager. It's an individual who was docked a salary. But beyond that, we are now holding the executives responsible for that business accountable for these glaring mistakes. So this is now what we have started to implement. We can note also that in the financial year under review, the executives that were providing some of the services in that space have left SITA before some of this consequence management was done. But the HOD, which is a DDG in government terms, has been demoted and has been docked a salary. But for now, we are now strengthening our consequence management where we don't just give warnings. People will need to fire. Where there is loss of value, we will recover those losses.
But you can't post about it that the same individual has received three written final warnings, and then you say to us the same individual has been demoted. 3 final warning written warnings. Final written warnings, 3 of them. And consequently, the individual is then demoted.
It's exactly what I'm confirming, because all of those disciplinaries were done concurrently for all of the instances of that of the irregularities that were found in the broadband contract. So the person received 2 written warnings and 1 final written warning, including a demotion and a deduction of a salary, something that happened in the beginning of the financial year. And that individual was also moved away from the telecoms business, and we then put in proper controls within that space. Is it, Honorable Chair, something that could have been done differently? Yes, I believe so. Could I have done something within then the 2 months I had during that period? The challenge then that one has is that there was already a consequence management implemented for the affected individual. So I couldn't then put that individual again on a disciplinary hearing. But if there is any additional bad behavior, irregularity, whatever it is, then it's a full disciplinary hearing that goes to the individuals being fired from the organization.
Yeah, I understand. In your case, that would have been double jeopardy. So indeed, we would have acted contrary to such a regulated process. But it looks like you are indeed content in following a firm practice in as far as setting out a proper record of discipline for the institution. If that is the case, the institution will somewhat gain in value and rebuild its own stature one way or the other. It looks like to me you have somewhat answered the question that relates to huge amounts in as far as the areas of procurement is concerned. One area which is outstanding for me is an instance that relates to specifications which were relaxed in terms of the contract IE 00213 for 425.3 million rand, and the technical valuation as well was relaxed in the instance of IE 00210 for 127 million rand, where technical evaluation requirements were totally ignored or relaxed. And this is so gross, and the amount is so huge on a single contract. What sort of action has been taken by yourself in as far as this instance is concerned?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, these are gross things. So if you start with the first one, is your Gauteng broadband contract, where the total irregularity that we received in that contract before condonation was about 429 million rands. And the real issue behind that contract, you have an evaluation committee that then says to the board, but there is nobody who is meeting this requirement. The top company, who is cheaper than everybody else, failed to ensure that they provide the CVs of the people that will deliver on this service. And then the board says, instead of canceling this tender, ensure that the CVs for the people who will deliver the broadband project for Gauteng specifically are received before you contract, and so that we then ensure that it is regular. I believe that decision should not have been made. And it is, I have to be frank, I know I was there for 2 months, but I take accountability for anything that has happened. Because when such instances happen, as we do now, we then say we understand what are the problems on the specifications that we have. Let's republish the tender, as I have done for the $500 million network tender already, to say, let's republish, let's see what are the things that make companies not meet the requirements find ways of clarifying that with prospective companies or relaxing them if your requirements are too onerous. But in this instance, the board took that decision. Yes, we confirmed that there is value for money. It was still the cheapest company overall above all of them. So if one had to take consequence management, it would be against the board and also against the CEO, who's no longer there, who also did not ensure that the contract was signed by himself before receiving those CVs. We can now confirm that we received those things after the fact. Can I now go and take consequence management against the board? Of course, as the minister opened about that, that board is no longer here. That board left in January last year already. But the principle then that we put is to say, yes, it is irregular, but is there any wastage? Because for me to go after the board or the former CEO, I can't discipline them to fire them. I want to recover lost value from the state. I want to recover funds. But in this instance, there is no wastage. We can still confirm that there is still value for money, but I didn't stop there, Chair. Also, what we have done, because the contract is expiring in October, it still had a 2-year period to extend. We've already agreed with Gauteng that the option of 2 years, we're not going to go with that option because it was irregular. Whether it's condoned or not, because it is now condoned, it will still not receive the additional 2 years from October. And I can also confirm we have already published a replacement contract to ensure that although it's already condoned, from October, when this one ends, it ends. We start on a clean slate with a new contract. So we have already, Chair, I can confirm we have implemented those measures. I unfortunately can't fire the board that has already left. I can't fire the CEO that has already left. But if there was any wastage, any wasteful expenditure, I would indeed be going after them. It is, Chair, exactly the same thing around the second contract you are mentioning, your cloud foundation infrastructure. Same principle. So instead of saying the experience we're asking for, we're asking them for bidders. But the bidders don't have this experience because this is the first time this thing is being implemented in South Africa. They should have asked the manufacturers, or what we call it, OEMs, so that we accept their experience. Instead of doing that, they then say, it makes sense that the service providers don't have this experience. Let us now allow the experience of the OEMs. Also, it is a wrong process. They should have rather says, let's now relax the specifications, republish them, so that we can then ensure when we award, it fully complies. So they didn't do that step. So hence, then it was declared irregular. Like the other one before, the company that won then that CFI was still the cheapest above all of them. And there is no wasteful expenditure in terms of the cloud foundation infrastructure that we have, which then, Chair, unfortunately, it locks my hands. I can't go after them. That board is not here. If it was one of the executives who was still here, I would indeed be going after that executive. But the reason I'm saying the board, Chair, because these are the decisions that were taken by the board, not the executive board. So the executive raised the risks and the issues to say we can't award because of this. Then the board says, okay, we approve the relaxation of the rules, which they did not have the power to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, CEO. From my side, I could see that you are on track in terms of ensuring that SITA occupies a rightful position in as far as a IT space is concerned, and being the technology agency which government will have to be reliant upon. The last from me would be, who sits in your procurement committee? Who sits in that responsible position on decision for these items for contract to be finalized on various facilities.
Thank you very much for the question. For all procurement less than 10 million, I need to explain it in context because SITA deals with almost 1,000 requests for procurement in a year's period. So you also want to make sure there are efficiencies, things move quicker. So for all procurement up to a 10 million rands, we do have a procurement committee that is chaired by what government will call it at a DG level. So we have an EBAC that then is chaired by one of our DDGs in financial management, who then chairs that committee. And we have a number of other HODs and senior managers that's sitting with that. But the finance DDG or HOD is then responsible to ensure that they run and manage that procurement committee. For anything up to a 10 million rands and above, up to 50 million rands, it is then a committee that includes myself, the CFO, some of the key operational executives that also sit in that committee. But one of the key things that we have now implemented within that is to ensure that anything above 10 million rands, you do not make any decision about it until you have 4 reports. You have a procurement report where the chief procurement officer can also confirm to us that this request is in line with procurement regulations. You also have an audit report, which is done by an external auditor that also confirms to us that indeed there were no audit issues around the report. You also have a third report from the head of legal services, who also says there are no legal issues in terms of this process. And then you have a final, most important report, a risk report. Because all of these things can pass, but there might still be an implementation risk or any other risk. So we receive all these 4 reports so that as we sit as procurement committee, we also receive all of this information so that when we make decisions, we holistically have that. And anything above 50 million rands is approved at a board level. But anyone who touches procurement, including myself, goes through a lifestyle audit independently managed by our head of risk management so that we can see what are some of the risks that we need to deal with. Not just people that are very rich and we don't know where the money comes from, which they follow that up with law enforcement agencies, but also people that we find that their finances are not that good. We also follow up with that to say we need to see a debt management plan because you can't sit in a procurement committee whilst you can't even manage your own finances because you might be easily influenced by the service providers. So we've implemented that, including finance officials. So overall, Chair, answering your question broadly, that's the type of team of people that sit there. So that if you need to corrupt SITA, you have to corrupt so many people, so many committees, including the external auditors. So we're doing this deliberately because we want to make it very difficult for people to corrupt the process, what SITA has been known for. So we want to live for an ethical leadership and live in our procurement decisions to be as ethical as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your broader scope of answering that question. Something which I was going to land up with was the fact that is your clearance status current in terms of vetting, starting from those who make big decisions, your board members, your executives, directors, some of the line functionaries who are party to these very sensitive decisions with financial outcomes.
Thank you. We can confirm that anyone from the management side, because also have MOUs that we have with SSA, where we also assist them within the space as part of our arrangement with that. So we do have valid or approved clearances, security clearances by the SSA. And then the department then deals with all the board members. to ensure that not only that their security clearances are done, but also proper disclosures of any possible conflict. That process is also done and managed by the department. The reason for that is it is the shareholder that appoints your directors. So we also engage with them to ensure that they put these processes in place. So we can confirm everyone who is employed at SITA, you do not get access to a specific classified documentation without either you getting that classification or without us submitting the relevant documentations to your SSA, where they do a pre-screening first so that you can continue to work. Because, Chair, it is a reality that your clearance from SSA takes long. But before you get your full clearance, we want to make sure the pre-screening is done, is completed. Then the only things that are usually remaining are the interviews then that SSA will do with your references. But minimum, get pre-screened, and we are working with the DG for SSA to ensure that we also receive full clearance. I can confirm for some people, it might take even up to 5 years. I know mine when I was a DDG at SASA in 2006, it took 5 years. My top clearance certificate, it took long. It is a reality that we still have today, but you can't touch money or procurement, at least without us doing the basic screening, vetting. And I can confirm what our team does is more than what normal departments do. Hence SSA, hence we have an MOU with SSA, not just for SITA officials. We also assist them for officials of other departments because of the type of work that we do.
Okay, if you have that, we'll be happy you can be preferred with a list of those role players in your line function up to the executives and their status in as far as the vetting is concerned. We'll be happy if you could be furnished with that. I'm sure the chair in his final remarks will be able to determine at what stage that would be required by us all. Honorable Minister, are you still there?
Yes, Honorable Sonia, I'm here.
Yes, the last from me is just hands on this very last question, which I've asked from the CEO and has gladly answered the part of it, but it relates to those who are your appointees. Is there any process of pure vetting and their certification of your board members so that you have a clearance certificate for each and every one of them?
Thank you so much, Honorable Somio, for that question. Yes, the appointment actually is pending approval of that. Once we do the security clearance, unfortunately, it takes up to 6 months. So what we normally do as advised by the security agencies, we do a police clearance whilst we are appointing them. Then we fast track the process to say then they must undergo the state security clearance within that 6 months. Therefore, their appointment is subject to those all the time. If the vetting process after 3 months or 4 months, when it comes back, says you do not qualify, you have done this, and then then you are kicked out. And as I said, this is due to the backlog that is faced at state security level. That's why there are delays. So then they said, instead of delaying everything, because we would have to wait for 8 months, for 9 months, for people to be employed, whether at administrative level or at board level. Then it was said, then check certain things in terms of the police clearance, and then they check against, the debts and all those things. They check the basic security clearance. So yes, I remember we did.
In the same vein, would you be kind to prefer us with a list and that process, and then the chair would determine what sort of a outline as far as that is concerned?
I will check, Chairperson, if that is allowed. I don't know, but I will definitely ask for the information from our SOE branch that is responsible for that administratively. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Over to you, Chair. Thanks from my side. Thanks to CEO and the Minister for responding to my questions. I only hope that indeed we are going to improve even further the functionality of SITA. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right. No, thank you very much, Babu Somyo. All those submissions that are required, today is Wednesday, so can we give it a week? Next week, Thursday, close of business. Anything that will be required. Right. Honorable Van Minen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just get everything going there. Right. So if I look at the mandate of SITA, among other things, it is to improve service delivery to the public through the provision of information technology, information systems, and related services in a maintained information system security environment to the department and public bodies, to promote the efficiency of departments and public bodies through the use of information. Now, looking at the documentation, I'm rather concerned about a number of things. I first want to unpack the issue of property, plant, and equipment. The AG raised a number of concerns in this regard, looking at the useful lives residual values, looking at the unchanging value of assets over the useful life, where it doesn't seem that any proper control is being kept here, about the impairment assessments, and also incorrectly including repair and maintenance expenses for the services that were rendered to other entities. So I just want to kick off to get an idea of what is going on in terms of the control systems and the valuing of the property, plant, and equipment, because I also note that currently, well, as of 2019, the plant and equipment is stated as having a value of 879 million rand. So can we just start unpacking with that as to exactly what is happening and the reaction to the concerns raised by the Auditor General, please?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I will then ask the CFO to respond technically to that question. I will do simple English after.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Beam Member, for the question. In essence, is the valuation, it comes down to every year in terms of the accounting standards. We've got to then, if an asset has 8 years, for example, original useful life, we've got to reassess the useful life. What we've done in the past, every year we've reassessed it and added to the useful life. But what had happened is when we took on new assets, those new assets that we took on, we took on at a shorter period. In essence, the AG says that when we then look at the new period that we take on assets, we're supposed to look and evaluate historical data to determine that assessment. So what we've done in the year that's passed, we have gone through a whole process of analyzing the historical data. We have gone through a process because the second thing that the AG has said is that we're not engaging enough with our lines of business when we decide on the useful life of the assets. And the nature of these assets, for example, the network equipment and those things, they didn't believe that finance was necessarily should do that in isolation and from the lines of business. So we have gone through a process where we consulted lines of business. We've gone through a process where we've looked at the historical data, analyzed it, and in essence is that has resulted during the current year of us revising the useful lives for all our assets. Now, one issue that the AG has is because of the process we followed in the past. What we did is you would find a network equipment, a router, but a similar router. The one router then has, because we sweat our assets and we don't necessarily replace our routers in 5 years, when we take on a new router, we take it on for 5 years. But when you look at the historical data, sometimes we use a router for over 10 years. And they say that you can't have a similar router that you use for 10 years, and then when you buy a new router, you then that new router you take on for useful life as 5 years. So that was an issue that they had. And in essence is that that then resulted, and if you look at the impact it has, that then you for the new routers you buy according to AG, then you depreciate too much. So you allow too much for depreciation because your useful life is too short. So because of the whole process we followed this year, in essence, our assets are managed by the Oracle, is on Oracle, and we're utilizing the fixed asset model for our assets. So in essence, what we had to do is we had to then go and do the reassessment, and we had to then apply the results into our Oracle system, and the new values for the assets have been recalculated. In essence, some of the assets are, for example, 10 years old. Even we went back to the purchase prices of those assets. So we went back to the very beginning to make sure that all our assets now has similar useful lives as well. There are controls over that. So the actual useful lives are included in the system itself. We do have the historical data on the use in the system itself. But previously we only looked at what's the current value and how much we expect to use it still, but we have now gone back in the past and actually adjust all those useful lives for all our assets. And that's the process we followed. It was quite an intensive process, honourable member, that the staff has, since the final, because also keep in mind the previous audit was finalised in October. So since after that, and from November till now, there was a lot of weekends that the staff worked over weekends. There was a lot of commitment from a lot of the staff, and I'm very grateful for some of the staff that showed all of this commitment. But there was a lot of work that had to be done. It sounds, from a technical perspective, it sounds we're just doing this and this and this. In reality, the time and the intensity of it was quite a lot. But the team has finalized those, and those calculations have been completed. The impairment assessments, Chairperson, was easier because the nature of it, there's only you can group assets and do the impairment on a group of assets. So that we've completed as well, but that was the easier part of the qualification. The most intense part was the actual useful life assessments. Honourable members. Thank you.
Okay. Then in terms of the recording of the assets, you say which you're using the Oracle system. Can you just expand on that, please?
Yes, we're using the Oracle system. So basically, the system is aligned to GRAP compliance. But now the system won't do, or what no financial system will do for you is when you exercise every year in terms of accounting standard, you've got to, and you're only allowed to do it once a year, and it must be at the same time every year you do it. You've got to assess the useful lives. Now, that assessment, you do a write-up. But the write-ups, a system will not do that for you. That's something that you do. And the results of that assessment and the results of those write-ups, you then implement on the system, and then the system will take it further. But we've got, honourable member, we've got over 20,000 assets. So it's not like it wasn't a quick exercise, but the reality is that assessment that you need to do, that's something you need to do yourself, and it's people intensive, and you won't find a financial system that does that for you. But what you do find in the financial system, the controls, once you've done it and you capture it on the system will then manage that for you going forward. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Then I want to move on to the issue of the intangible assets. So the intangible assets were valued at 298 million. Would you like to just please give the committee a quick overview as to what the intangible assets as such would comprise of?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Honourable Member. Intangible asset is an asset. Is still a fixed asset, but it's an asset that you don't have a specific physical form. So you can't touch it, you can't move it, and that's typically your licenses. It's for us. There's two main portions of intangible assets. The one is the licenses, and that's also managed. It's also included in our fixed asset register. So that's the one thing. And then the second thing is the baby board systems. So we call it in construction in progress systems, CIP projects, but those are also intangible systems. So it's the internally developed systems. Now that internally developed systems, that if you look at the accounting standards, one thing that they want you to do, for example, is if you have an impairment indicator, those intangibles, you need to then, from an impairment perspective, link it to see if your future cash flows that you will get at least exceeds the amount that you're carrying of the intangible assets. So that's what the impairment is all about. And then on the licenses, we also reviewed contracts to make sure it's properly captured, because in essence is your normal annual licenses will not form part of your intangible assets. It's normally licenses where you've got a contract for that you get the benefit for over a year. So if you've got a 3-year contract for licenses, the license part of that contract will form an intangible asset. So that we've cleaned up quite a bit as well. And then the impairment, we don't have that many internally developed projects, but where we do have it, we've now done a proper impairment assessment as well, and looked at whether there's signs of impairment. The useful life of your intangible assets is much easier than those for your physical equipment, because your useful lives, you normally link it to a contract, and where it's internal developed systems, if you own the system, so you can, the accounting standards make provision for either you've got a finite useful life, which means you don't necessarily have you can amortize it, but in most cases we do amortize it in terms of the assessment. But then what's very important, what I think that what the Auditor General bothered most about the intangible assets last year was actually the impairment, while on the fixed asset side they were more worried about the useful lives, even though the impairment they were not happy with, but the useful lives was a big thing. On the intangible asset side, they were more worried impairment, even though they were not happy with our useful life assessments, but that was easy to clean up. But the impairment they were more worried about, purely because on the intangible aspects, as your possible impairments, or your risk of an impairment is much higher. While on your fixed assets, your risk of a material statement, because your useful lives, are much higher. But in both qualifications, they were not happy with both. But on the one, the useful lives on the fixed assets are more important, while the intangible assets, the impairment was more of a focus area. But we've covered both. We covered the useful lives as well as the impairments for that as well. But that's really your licenses, software licenses, that spans over more than a year, and your internally developed systems, Honourable Member.
Thanks. So in terms of what the AG has raised in this regard, so the SITA is a state innovation agency, which, to use a rather overused phrase, is there to support the fourth industrial revolution for the government. But the concern is that the register for the intangible assets was not sufficient. So how are these intangible assets recorded and stored?
Chairperson, I can only, sorry, apologies, Honourable Member, I can only, what I talk to is the assets that's owned by SITA. Our asset register as such does not, the internal asset register does not include the assets used by government, because that's a separate division looking after that. So as a finance department, we focus, and that was the qualification, was the internal assets. But the asset register itself it's got the same controls as for the other assets. except, when the other estimates says there's more judgment involved. With intangible assets, if you've got a period of 3 years, your useful life is 3 years. And that's why maybe on the intangible side, you don't have to apply as much judgment as you do over the fixed assets. But in terms of addressing the issue, we've gone through a review of the contracts as well to make sure that our register of our internally owned intangible assets, the assets that's owned by SITA, is now accurate and complete. So that's what we've done. So, but it was a matter of the difference here is when you go to the intangible assets, you normally go to contracts. With the internal developed assets, what we do have there is we've got all the cost comes through the project management model, so your costs are fine. The issue there is that now if you've got a internally generated asset, there's a specific obligation in terms of the standards that every year for internally generated assets you have to assess impairment. And I think our payment in the prior years were not done properly. So I think we sort of followed a quicker process in prior years, while this year we really assessed, we linked it to the service level agreements, to future cash flows. So we've gone through that whole exercise to make sure the value that we have is not a value that we should be impairing. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thanks. And then also a concern that has come up about both intangible assets and plant is the concern around assumptions being made by the public entity, and also that the internal control is not necessarily adequate to produce reliable data. So you were talking about with plant actually physically going to essentially check on property. How does this work with the intangible assets side of things?
Chairperson, in essence, is what the Auditor General has said, and the underlying data. What they said is when we have a value of an asset, we did not clearly link the future cash flows to it. So when they want to audit it and they want to see how we measure the value against the future cash flows to see if we will still actually get the value for the assets that are in the books. So if the asset is 500 million rand, I'm using any amount, I don't remember, there's no assets, but the 500 million rand, they want to see in terms of future cash flows and the value for that asset, that the value that you will get from that asset in the future is at least the 500 million rand. And there was no, the data that we produced to the AG was, in their view, not auditable, and it was not very specific, linked to this, our contracts with the customers and those things. So that was a big portion of the assessment that we've done this year, is to make sure when we now provide them data on the future cash flows and those things, that is supported by proper assumptions, that is supported by proper, we can link it to the actual documentation that we've got available, etc. So that was from an intangible asset perspective, that was a big part of addressing the AG concerns. Honourable Member.
Thanks very much. Chair, I'm going to hand back to you to open up for everybody else. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Honourable Somi and Honourable Van Minen. Colleagues, are there any hands? Colleagues?
Good evening, Honourable Chairperson, colleagues and members.
Over to you.
I am almost covered, Chair, with the responses that we got from by my colleagues, as well as the response from the SITA and the Minister. Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson.
Right, colleagues, Honourable Mente.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm not sure, because I had a problem of network, if this area has been well covered where the Auditor General, in one of the findings, was the issue of procurement and contract management. And Auditor General cited a number of reasons that were about 8 of them, very worrisome of them, where some of the companies were not meeting the requirements as per the South African Revenue Services. Their tax matters were not in order. Some were extended and modified without approval of a properly delegated official as required by Section 44 of the PFMA and the Treasury Regulation. But in total, it's 8 of them, and they are very serious, meaning whichever official that had committed those transgressions was well aware of the standing regulations and laws that are governing the expenditure framework in times of procurement. And also in terms of contract management, Treasury also in February gave us a report, a very concerning report where variations and extensions were requested, and they had to turn down a number of them for a number of projects. I want to find out, Chairperson, is that being addressed? And if it's addressed, are the officials who are involved in this malice and trying to make their own law and create their laws in a space where we have direct and clear laws to govern us where procurement is concerned? Thank you, Chair.
All right, let's get a response to that comprehensive question.
All right, thank you, Chair. And indeed, I can confirm we did address that, the lack of proper contract management, whereas part of the initiatives, as I've explained earlier, including bringing in an HOD for contract management, putting up your contract management systems in place that also CFO talked to, your Oracle, which we use also for our contract management, ensuring also that there are no invoices that are being paid without ensuring that there is a contract behind it, and beyond that, the contract must be valid. So all of those processes have already been implemented. The key issue that Treasury also had, where they were not condoning any of the submissions that SITA was providing to them, was lack of proper, clear consequence management. So which is part of then what we have done. Hence, when we've started, we've indicated that at least now half of what we have, half of the 2 billion has already been condoned by Treasury, as they have now been comfortable with the detailed information we've provided in terms of consequence management following the full framework. And we have already done work to dispute some of the contracts that were possibly irregular, and we're submitting another contract just a little bit more than 500 million, and we will conclude the remaining contracts by Monday as we go to board. So on some of those things, I can confirm we have now indeed started implementing proper consequence management. For the employees that are already within the organization, we have already implemented consequence management. As I've explained in the questions from Honorable Somio, the challenge then that I have is that if you've already been tried on this matter and either given the final written warning, I then don't have legal powers to charge those people again and even provide more harsher sanction, as I believe some of the sanctions that SITA has been given in the years were very lax. So it was warnings, final written warnings, but not really firing of people. But also, as you would have seen in the report that we have given, a lot of officials were allowed to resign and leave the organization during the process of consequence management, including executives, your HODs, your Peter Gutierrez, Johnson, Giorgio, and a lot of others that are senior managers, HODs that were allowed to leave. We are now putting processes where we're not allowing senior managers to leave during that process. We want to finish disciplinary hearing. But also the last thing that Treasury also raised was that consequence management at SITA takes long. So you will have a 2-year disciplinary process. It's not quick, it's not to the point. And we rely too much on appointing external advisors to do that. We have changed those processes now where we ensure that we implement consequence management quickly and we become decisive as an organization. We stop always having to hire external audit firms, legal firms, advisors on things that we should be doing as ourselves. So I can confirm to that, Honorable Chair, we are indeed now addressing those things. And also the last part, our consequence management now is no longer focusing on lower level officials. The contracts that we signed is that executives take full accountability for any expenditure that happens in their own divisions so that they stop blaming lower level officials. So meaning an executive is accountable for all the contracts and the expenditure in his own department to ensure that processes are put in place. We don't have these things recurring forever, and it's dismissible offense. So at least now we have implemented those contracts. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Menta, are you fine?
Just one more clarity. I like the way accounting authority is choosing his words very carefully, but at the very same time being decisive, that there are transgressions which are dismissible offenses. And as an organization, as much as the disciplinary hearings would have already ran their course and findings of those DCs have been done, you have categorized charges that if you are charged with the following, it's a dismissible offense. And in terms of the labor law under the Code of Good Practice, it empowers you to enforce such outcomes of dismissible offenses, because you cannot then have one person being dismissed for giving a company which has scored less of points and not give a company that has scored more points, but you are giving this company simply because it's going to reward you with a kickback and that you think it's not going to be seen by anyone. So my plea to you is that can we then, as this committee, be given a clear list of what is a dismissible offense when it comes to you? Because, Chair, I can assure you, we are today sympathizing with SITA and the new management that let's give them their room to correct all these wrong things. But these findings are going to come back in this financial year, which is going to be audited. And we're going to find them ourselves here. Now, can we get the list of what is a dismissible offense when it comes to SITA, in particular where people are committing crime? Because it's not only an issue of a disciplinary hearing where a person is deliberately choosing someone who do not qualify to get a contract and leave a person who qualifies to get a contract, which then leaves SITA to be spending money on lawyers, saving itself from court, because service providers, when they realize that we had qualified, a person who did not qualify received a tender, and therefore we must challenge this process at court. And you have to find SITA having to spend unnecessary funds defending itself at court due to a corrupt individual who is there and didn't do their work. And that on its own should be a dismissible offense. And also the cost of the court should be paid by such individuals. I'm trying to expatiate on why should we then from you get what do you deem as a dismissible offense, and therefore going forward, we will ask you exactly on the findings of the AG as well as Treasury, National Treasury, when they give us information about SITA, that this one, we had to turn it down. This one is a finding of the AG, which we had already highlighted in the previous financial year and the year before that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. I can confirm to you, just to use two for argument's sake, corruption is not just a dismissible offense, it is also a criminal matter. And I can confirm to you that the SITA we are in now, we are no longer the SITA that defends things, and we are scared of giving documents to your law enforcement agencies. I can now confirm we partner with all of them. We voluntarily give them any information that we uncover in the investigations that we do. Even when we go to court, we fight with other people. I personally even go to your law enforcement agencies, your SIUs, your HOGs, your public protector, to say, these are the things we're dealing with. How do you wish to partner with us in this, including our own officials? And I can confirm we have also lodged cases even against our own former officials, criminal cases where for corruption for us, it's not just a dismissible offense, it's a criminal offense, and we are implementing that. We will even willing to even give you information legally if allowed to, that even confirms some of those criminal cases we've even opened, even for people that leave. Because we want to be clear that you can't just now resign and go because we're finding something wrong that we have done. The second key issue on the dismissible offense is wasteful expenditure. And we don't just dismiss you, we also want to recover the funds from you on anything that we deem in our loss control committee as wasteful expenditure. So we are indeed doing that, and we're even willing to give you information in terms of what are the legal processes we have already implemented where we want our money back for anything that we deem as wasteful expenditure by negligence of you as an executive failing to do what you ought to have done. As I've explained, Chair, focus for us is not on lower level employees. My key focus is ensure that executives are taking full accountability of what they do. Because I believe that's the only way we can change the organization. By us who are paid more money, we must do the right things that we need to do. I thank you, Chair.
Right, colleagues, is that it? Just checking our WhatsApp group here. If there, all right, there are no more hands. All right. I hear the very understanding tone of colleagues, given the circumstances which we are faced with, that we are dealing with individuals today who themselves have been brought in to turn things around. And so I would imagine that they view the situation with the kind of seriousness which we view it as well. Notwithstanding the very articulate responses that we have received, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. And I remain a doubting Thomas when it comes to all these entities until things have actually turned around, because we've been down this road before with entities. The situation at SITA, for all intents and purposes, it speaks to an entity that just imploded. If you look at the extent of the regression insofar as the audit outcomes are concerned. And quite clearly, it's not going to be an easy institution to turn around. And I say that, therefore, that we need to manage our expectations very, very carefully in the sense of optimism which is there, so that we are measured in the hopes and aspirations that we have, at the very realistic, so that we are able to do things correctly. So I say that so that it is not lost on the leadership of SITA that's here, that whilst having heard all that has been said, these responses are only meaningful insofar as the audit outcomes that are due painting a picture of an improvement, because you would have been in office for the entire duration of the year. The second point is that given the seriousness of the issue on one hand, but also the strategic significant importance of SITA on the other, this is an entity that we need to watch very, very closely, because we are still to meet with SITA and the South African police on other outstanding matters. The ramifications of the collapse of SITA or non-performance of SITA and the challenges of SITA are not confined to SITA. They've got an impact on other institutions of state. And so it is important then that we get things right, because it's for the greater good, not just for the entity. So there are still those outstanding matters that we need to grapple with insofar as SITA is concerned. So we will still have to go back to those matters. On the issue of vetting, colleagues, I'm just, of course, worried about the fact that the program of Parliament is coming to an end, and we're going to have to meet during the recess period for urgent and serious matters only. But I think just as Mam Tolashe has raised the issue of the performance agreements insofar as the presidency is concerned, there is a similar matter now of this vetting with the State Security Agency, which is a perennial headache, actually, but one which shouldn't surprise us if you listen to the revelations coming out at the Zondo Commission. So I would imagine, colleagues, we're going to need to have to make a determination about how we squeeze that in urgently. Next week, we're dealing with the DBSA on Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning, we are dealing with the SIU, bringing the next tranche of reports insofar as the PPE COVID-19 investigations of corruption is concerned. Of course, we can't meet in a graveyard session next week, Wednesday, because it's the presidency budget vote and it only concludes at 19:30. But we will have to find time. I don't know. We will have to discuss, but I think it's urgent and incumbent on us that we deal with the issue of vetting now, because it's a golden thread amongst all the entities and departments appearing before us, the bottlenecks in that system. And so I think we do need to resolve it. And I'm just reacting to what has been said, because that is, it's not unique to SITA as well. And there too, the ramifications of that is you've got people in supply chain, amongst others, who have not been vetted. You've got people in management and leadership positions that have not been vetted. And this is despite the cabinet resolution about this vetting, that it has to happen, and we've been pursuing its implementation. So I think, colleagues, let's apply our minds to that particular aspect and see how flexible we can be to deal with it. So, Minister, what we're going to request is that because obviously there's an audit action plan which is in place to deal with all the issues that the Auditor General has raised, and you are under audit now. We're going to request monthly reports on progress made on all these key areas of the audit outcomes. So specifically on property, plant and equipment, the intangible assets, the irregular expenditure, the material misstatements of work. I suppose that will only be dealt with once we've received the final annual report and statements, but a progress report insofar as to how you are dealing with the material misstatements in the submitted financial statements as well. On the expenditure management, on procurement and contract management as well, and on consequence management. So if those reports around those key areas of the findings insofar as the 1920 financial year are concerned, that we receive the monthly reports, and the first report to reach us at the end of June, because May has ended now, so the first report to come in at the end of June. Colleagues, I conclude by saying, and then we'll hand over to the ministers to say, yes, there've been these dismissals, there's been these changes of people, but I still don't get a sense that consequence management has been handled in a manner which it's impactful. It's an outcome to chuck the board out, but what is the material impact on the people who have been chucked out? Because they just go on to become other things. They go on to be employed within the state's machinery. And so here too, we have to really deal with that. But I'm still not satisfied insofar as consequence management is concerned, but we'll await the report at the end of June. And of course, SIU, because you are always here, we hope that you will look into some of these matters, and the cooperation which has been touted will gain traction and fruition, and that we will be able to get results. So I conclude on that note, colleagues, and to rein in the heightened optimism and say that we will only derive maximum satisfaction once we have received the forthcoming audit outcome. And I think now SITA has got a better understanding of our expectations, and that we want all these qualifications to be rectified as a matter of urgency through proper corrective action. Right, colleagues, let me hand over to the Minister for concluding remarks, and then we will bring our graveyard session to an end. Mafagu, over to you.
Did you just say graveyard session, Chair?
Yes, we call this evening session a graveyard session because we're working extra hours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson. And thank you, honorable members, for those engagements. Indeed, they seek to enhance the work that we do, that even if we thought that when we come to account, there's certain things that we may be leaving out, but it also helps us to look at ways of improving on how to better deliver the services that are expected from us. Chairperson, I want to make reference to one thing that was requested in relation to the security clearance reports or the police clearance reports. I just checked with our legal. We will also request your support in that, because there's the POPI Act that we must get consent from the individuals concerned. So when that time comes, as much as we're going to try to go to that, but if needs be, we'll appeal to yourselves to also try to assist us with that. As I come back to the issues that Chairperson, you highlighted that you expect of us by the end of June, The team led by the executive caretaker or the chairperson of SITA is here, and they are listening to you. One of the critical things that we have adopted, chairperson, in line with ensuring that indeed when we say we fight corruption, we fight it from the root level. Because we have observed that in most cases, we've been paying attention only at the upper level and not looking at the causal reasons that lead to all of this. So we said we have these state-owned entities. When we check, because we are also cognizant of the fact that there's a lot that has happened in the state-owned entities, as you rightfully say. So we're not only looking at performance. The first thing that we did was to say we request an audit and a report of the impact of the state capture in the entities, so that when we employ strategies, we know what it is that we are dealing with. SITA, although it has not been involved in those, it has not been highly mentioned in those, except for the EOH contracts. But even here in Parliament, there's been lots of issues that have been raised in relation to the corruption that has been happening. This is why the executive caretaker was listing those. But to further take it and ensure that our consequences indeed are impactful, chairperson, we have said under our portfolio, anyone that has been found guilty in relation to corruption or whatever that is against what this government stands for, one cannot work in the state. We make sure that we provide a report. Of course, if one challenges it and then gets his name cleared, we don't stand before that. But at least I know, as I'm speaking to you, we have somebody that we recently have to remove, who was working in one of our agencies, and he was coming from another agency of ours. And when we got the reports on investigation that was done in relation to the work that is being done, we then spoke to the board to say, we do appreciate that you have contracts and everything, but there's this thing that is in our hands, and we cannot in the same portfolio have a person who has been found guilty and criminal charges are laid against him or her. And that, of course, that is done within the labor relations and the legal framework that we have. So we are trying, chairperson, as much as we talk about building the capability of the state, but there's a lot that we need to do, not only looking at the perception that is there when it comes to the integrity of the work that we do, but we are inspired every day by saying we have confidence that in South Africa, it doesn't matter if we have 5 or 10% that is too corrupt, but there are still good people in this country. And therefore we invest our energies in saying, how do we help those that are good and those that are committed to their work to excel and make South Africa proud that indeed as the state we can really deliver as expected. SITA, as you put it, chairperson and honorable members, is a very critical agency, especially in the era that we are participating in. Whether we talk about the protection of government information or people's information, this resides with SITA, which is why we said there's a need for us to have a complete overhaul of the legislations in order to be responsive to the challenges of today. Honorable Chair, when we made all these laws in the 19th and the 18th, we never foresaw a situation whereby the unit of analysis would be data. And this is what we are faced with today. Therefore, it requires us to analyze the kind of a board member that must go to SITA, the kind of management that must go to SITA, the kind of a regulator, including the legislator that must provide that role towards SITA, because as I said, it is a critical arm in terms of not only of government, but in terms of ensuring that indeed the digital transformation can be achieved and a meaningful one and effective that benefits the people of South Africa. Honorable members, let me take this opportunity once more to thank you for affording us another opportunity to come and make a representation and explain ourselves to you. We are living here better people, and next time, definitely when we come back, we will know what is expected, and we will promise that we will not fail you. Thank you so much.
All right, colleagues. On that note, for anyone who may have thought our hearing was aggressive, we were merely being assertive. I'm sure the minister will relate to that particular aspect of what I'm saying. Let me thank Honorable Somyo and Honorable Van Minen specifically for leading the hearing this evening. And thank you very much, colleagues, for your participation this evening. We thank the Minister for being here. I'm not sure if the Deputy Minister is here. If she is, also thank you to her and to the leadership of the department and the leadership of SITA, SIU and AG. We appreciate your continued support in ensuring that we execute our work in a manner which is, National Treasury is also here today. National Treasury, thank you as well. And Minister, so the first report will be due at the end of June, and then from there, end of July, and so on, until such time that we have received the annual report. So colleagues, in the absence of any other hand or any other comment, let me thank you and declare the meeting closed, and we will meet next week, Tuesday, to interact on the DBSA matter. As you will recall, that there were allegations that were made, and the opportunity is being granted to the leadership of DBSA to respond to those allegations, and then for the committee to make a determination about how we will be moving with that particular matter. So they have been given the information. And Sister Tommy, please make sure, Ben, that we receive those submissions by Friday, so that members will have an opportunity to interact with them during the course of the weekend in preparation for next week, Tuesday, and then Wednesday we will meet with the SIU. Colleagues, thank you very much. The meeting stands adjourned. Good night.
Long live the chair.
Recording stopped.
That's, Talasha, you always make my day.
I cannot be there, chair. I cannot be there. I cannot be there. I can see Honorable today. He is writing Alice.
The commitment,
I'm at home in Alice.
I can see.
Commitment, we applaud that commitment to Bambi graveyard session under the circumstances that you did.
Thanks.
Teamwork works. All right, guys. Good night.
Good night.
Not you.